Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Zechariah chapter 11. Now, a couple of things I want to go over. I think I missed in terms of, got distracted. But the Zechariah is a post prophecy. And the reason why I make that emphasis is because and I mentioned last time, just kind of as a recap, how we were studying the writings of the prophet, that we started actually with the minor prophets, not because they're minor, but because the dating. So if you go back from a post, from the exile, the destruction of Jerusalem, the writings of the prophets began about 250 years before that. And I say that is because you can always chart prophecy. You can always chart prophecy. Oh, excuse me. You can kind of chart where you are at in terms of a prophetic timeline. So if you were in the book of Joel, listening to the prophecies of Joel, you know what timeline, you know what time you were. Same thing with Isaiah, same thing with Jeremiah. Remember Daniel was able to read Jeremiah's prophecies. And these prophecies comes with its own, you can say, um, timeline, its own current events. So, and what's neat about the prophecies, if you study them, you can see that. Here's a good example. Remember in the book of Daniel itself, you start in Daniel in the 7th chapter, and you start with Nebuchadnezzar's grandson Belteshazzar, right? Then when we get to chapter 9, we've already moved on in prophecy to Darius, the Medes and the Persians. But then on one set, when in Daniel chapter 2, the human image that was given in the dream to Nebuchadnezzar, you had 5 kingdoms. And then when we move on to chapter 9, we see that chapter 8, we see that there are 4 kingdoms. Why? We moved on in time. Okay? So Zechariah is a post-exile. So the prophecy is moving on. We're moving on with prophecy. Okay, now let's bring up, because we left off talking about this prophecy here, and I wanted to look at verse 12. And he says, "Then I said to them, if it seems right to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them." So they weighed out my wages, 30 pieces of silver. And then he said, "Throw it to the potter." The Lord said to me, "This magnificent price I was valued by them." So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw it into the house of the Lord to the potter. Now, this is an amazing piece of prophecy, because what you have here, and then let's go to one of the fulfillment of this very prophecy, when it says, "Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he was condemned, was full of remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. And then he said, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. What is that to us?" Say, do it yourself. So he threw the silver into the sanctuary, right? And departed. Then he went and hanged himself. The chief priest took the silver and said, "It is not lawful to put it into the temple treasury, since it is blood money." So they conferred together and bought the potter's field with it as the burial place for the foreigners. Therefore the field has been called Blood Field to this day. Then what was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him whose price was set by the Israelites, and they gave it to them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Now there's a what this is such an amazing prophecy. And I say it like this. I said this last time, that the Pharisees had to know they were fulfilling prophecy. That's the amazing thing. Now, the Pharisees were so corrupt. They were so um, um, evil. They didn't care. You see, Judas was overwhelmed with guilt, but he was also evil as well, because if you think about this, instead of repenting or asking the Lord to forgive him, he took matters in his own hands and ended his life. Okay, so but this prophecy again, right before our eyes here. Now, I'm looking up something here because I'm still trying to figure out where did I miss this at. The reason why I say that here is because Matthew says the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled and not Zechariah. And this is Zechariah is the one that's the strongest, the strongest here. So, okay, so I'm trying to look up something here. Hold on, guys. I'm gonna look this up because I'm okay. All right, guys. I wanted to look at kind of discrepancies here when Judas says, I'm going to wait till we get to the book of Matthew, however, to deal with this. So I'm going to table this till we get to the book of Matthew. In terms of what Matthew says, as far as the what was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, and of course, what we see is that the prophecy is spoken and written down by Zechariah. Now, here's the part that I wanted to also bring out: how God awful the Pharisees were. That as they are actually carrying this out, that they are actually carrying out an actual recorded prophecy. You know, that they had. I mean, by the way, and when you go through Matthew, they do several things about that. But this is where this prophecy actually is, and we saw where it was actually fulfilled. That he said, so he took the 30 pieces of silver and threw it into the house of the Lord to the potter. And then you see that is fulfilled, okay, through Judas and the Pharisees. And so he says, all right, now, okay. So verse 13 says, throw it to the potter. The Lord said to me, this magnificent price that I was valued by them. So I took 30 pieces of silver and threw it to the house of the Lord, to the potter. So this prophecy of the betrayal of Jesus here, right? The betrayal of Jesus. Right? Okay, I'm always amazed, again, to me, a fulfilled prophecy. Now, verse 14 says, then I cut into my second staff, union annulling the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. The Lord said to me, take the equipment of the foolish shepherd. I'm about to raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for those who are going astray, and he will not seek the lost or heal the broken. He will not sustain the healthy, but he will devour the flesh of the fat sheep and tear off their hooves. Now, we cannot help but to make, excuse me, a comparison to this definition of what a good shepherd would be, and then versus a bad shepherd. So let me read kind of the rest of this, and I'll come back and then talk about the comparison here. Verse 17 says, "Woe to the worthless shepherds who desert the flock. May the sword strike his arm, and his right eye, and may his arm wither away, and his right eye go completely blind." Now, what I want to do, I want to go back here in verse 15, and I want you to see something about this, and I want to make a comparison about shepherds today. Now, shepherds are used. Jesus, if you remember, he calls himself the Good Shepherd. And then the leaders of the people of God, and so in the Old Testament, Israel, and even going into Jesus' time, the leaders who would be like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because they are the leaders. And remember, Jesus even made this statement that though they sit in Moses' chair, so he says, do what they say. So in other words, obey even the bad, as long as they're not leading you away from God. But in other words, respect the office in a sense. And so I'm going to say that today when we talk about church leaders, that unfortunately we have a bunch of bad shepherds. And so when we come into the church age, that this word shepherds, by the way, another word for shepherd is pastors. Now there's of course a big discussion as to what would be the leadership of the church. And there are three different kinds of leadership in the church. The biblical precedence, in other words, what started was you would have an apostolic leader, so an apostle who, and the difference in apostle and a pastor, an apostle usually would start a church. He would go in his ministry, he would go into a town, he would go into a region, he would evangelize that region, and then after winning the people to the Lord, he would then set up churches and establish. He would put elders in the church, and then he would go to the next town. That's what Paul did. Timothy and Titus were those whom he would appoint to kind of oversee the establishing of the church and to watch them. Now, in that kind of leadership, you would have a group of elders. Church was different than how we have church today. In a denominational setting, you would have the denominational. So in this sense, a denomination is almost like an apostolic force. Then they would put an elder under the various churches. So whatever the denomination is, then with exception, I'm going to say the Catholic Church, they do have, I think, a head bishop over them, or cardinal, or somebody, I think, head. But pretty much all the denominations kind of follow the suit that under the denominations, you would have the denomination itself, the body of elders in that denominations, they would be the leaders. They set the policies. They could set up and remove the leadership in the local congregations. Of late, you have what's called the independent church. So you have churches that they break away from denominations and they start their own church. You have a lot of mega churches that are independent, as well as you have mega churches that are denominational. But one of the phenomena of the mega churches is that they're independent churches. In other words, they belong to no denominations. And usually the head pastor, the senior pastor, is the leader of the church. And depending on how he structures it, he's the head, and then he would have a body of elders. Now, depending on some cases, the body of elders could have more authority. In my opinion, if a pastor is smart, you would never give that much authority to the elders. In some churches they're called deacons. I think it's just kind of semantics in terms of name. But they rule the church, they govern the church, they tell the pastor how much money he can spend, and yada yada yada. And I personally, opinion, I think that's especially a mega pastor. If God called you to a work to start a church, why would you give authority for people to oust you? That's usually what could happen. That's what you have in a lot of these mega churches now. Infighting going on, especially if the pastor dies. You have a lot of infighting because the elders come along. There have been bodies of elders who have ousted founding pastors. But I'm digressing here. Because they also have, a lot of these churches are just stinking mess. Okay. So how do you know a good shepherd? So, and the thing is, whatever it is you want to say, whatever the church leadership, whatever it is, how can you tell if it is a good pastor, a good shepherd, a good leader? And there are several scriptures that give us that. This is one of them. We saw in the book of Jeremiah where he rebuked the shepherds for feeding themselves. Sound familiar today? The prosperity, faith and prosperity message where the pastors feed themselves. Okay? That's why they brag about their Bentleys, they brag about their expensive suits, their expensive watches, and their homes. They actually brag about it, and the people clap and go, "Oh, we want our pastor to be prosperous." Okay, yes, I was a part of churches like that for many, many, many years, and I can tell you, it's a sham. None of the people prosper that way. None of the people. None of the people prosper that way. It's a gimmick. It's a marketing, but most of it, it's a gimmick. They're feeding themselves. They're the ones that get rich. And they use the church, they use the church's resources to market themselves, and that's how they get more money. But look at this here. He says in verse 15, he says, the Lord also said to me, take the equipment of the foolish shepherd. I'm about to raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for those who are going astray. Now, what I want to do is I want to reverse this, because this is a foolish shepherd. Now let's reverse this and say, now this is then what a good shepherd should be. So the bad shepherd is what he's going to raise up. He says, they're going to raise up a shepherd who will not care for those who are going astray, who will not seek the lost, heal the brokenhearted, who will not sustain the healthy, but he will devour the flesh of the fat sheep and tear off their hooves. In other words, he will feed himself. The reverse of that is that a good shepherd will care for those who are going astray. I can tell you, I've been a part of churches that when I left, they never called, right? You disappear, and then the congregation would treat you as if you are a diseased person, like a leopard. In fact, it's always even awkward even going back visiting. Sometimes you go back and visit for an event, usually maybe a funeral. Some people think that when you leave their church, you're actually being broken off, like a branch broken off, and they treat you that way. The congregation treats you that way. So a good shepherd is one that, notice he said, that would care for those going astray. That he would go out when they're lost. Jesus even said that. He goes out, he leaves the 99 and goes and get that lost sheep. A lot of pastors get mad when you leave their congregation. Notice he said, he will not seek the lost. Notice he said, heal the broken hearted. Notice he said, will not sustain the healthy. A good pasture that sustains the healthy sheep. So a good shepherd is there not to feed himself, not to become famous, not to be wealthy, to enrich himself. He's there to what? To take care of God's flock. He is there to feed them. And this really has nothing to do with kind of the amount of money. You got these pastors that brag on their wealth. Like I say, the reason why I don't care about them because they don't get a dime of my money. I do criticize them. I criticize them highly because they're not caring for this flock of people. And when you see how some of the flock are, how some of the flock are falling out, they don't care. They really don't care. They just, in their marketing, they're just going to replenish them with people, with new marketing that reach different people. So they don't care about the people that leave the church. Okay, bad pastors don't. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad pastors out there. Yes, there are good pastors out there as well, but there's a lot of bad ones. And let me tell you this, maybe because too, a lot of the bad ones just are the ones that are mostly on TV and on radio, on YouTube now. Unfortunately, the good ones are not as popular as the bad ones. And the reason why is because the bad ones are using these to enrich their own platforms. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share, like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.